So you think being a medieval warrior was all about honor, glory, and rescuing damsels in distress? Yeah. No. Let me tell you what it was actually like to swing a sword for a living in the Middle Ages, and spoiler alert, it was way grosser and more depressing than Game of Thrones ever showed you. First things first, let's talk about how you even become a warrior in medieval Europe. If you were born a peasant, which statistically you probably were, congratulations. You're holding a pitchfork, not a sword. Real warriors were almost exclusively nobles who started training at around 7 years old. Yeah, 7. While modern 7-year-olds are playing Fortnite, medieval kids were getting shipped off to some lord's castle to become a page, which is basically a fancy word for child servant who occasionally gets stabbed during training. You'd spend years learning how to serve food, clean armor, and maybe, if you were lucky, hold a practice sword without dropping it. Then around age 14, you'd become a squire, which meant you got to follow an actual knight around and do all his dirty work. Literally. You'd help him get dressed, feed his horse, clean his weapons, and occasionally hold his shield while he fought someone. Romantic, right? Now let's say you survive all that and actually get knighted around age 21. Congrats! You're now qualified to get killed in horrible ways. But before we get to that, let's talk about your gear. Everyone thinks plate armor is cool, right? Shiny metal makes you look like a tank. Perfect protection. Wrong. First of all, full plate armor didn't even exist until the late 14th century. And even then, it cost about as much as a luxury car costs today. Most warriors wore chainmail, which sounds cool, until you realize it weighs about 55 pounds and does absolutely nothing to stop blunt force trauma. A guy with a big hammer could turn you into a human accordion while your chainmail just sits there looking pretty. Oh, and chainmail doesn't breathe. So imagine wearing 55 pounds of metal rings in the summer heat. You're basically cooking yourself like a rotisserie chicken. Knights would regularly pass out from heat exhaustion before even reaching the battlefield. Speaking of battlefields, let's destroy another myth. Medieval battles were not like the movies. There were no dramatic one-on-one duels where knights exchanged witty banter. Medieval combat was basically a giant mosh pit of violence where everyone was trying to stab, crush, or dismember everyone else as quickly as possible. The key strategy was something called a shield wall, where you'd line up shoulder to shoulder with your buddies and just push forward while stabbing anything that moved. Subtle, right? And here's the thing, nobody tells you. Medieval weapons were brutal. We're not talking about clean sword fights. We're talking about maces designed to pulverize skulls, war hammers that could punch through armor like a can opener, and poleaxes that combined an axe, a hammer, and a spear into one nightmare murder tool. Oh, and arrows? Those things could penetrate 4 inches of solid wood. Now imagine what they did to human flesh. But here's where it gets really fun. The hygiene. Or should I say, the complete lack thereof. You know what nobody tells you about wearing armor? You can't exactly take bathroom breaks. Knights would literally urinate and defecate in their armor during long battles. They'd be standing there in a pool of their own filth for hours, fighting for their lord's honor while marinating in medieval sewage. And after the battle, you didn't just get to go home and take a nice shower. Showers didn't exist. You'd be lucky to get a bucket of cold water and a rag. Most warriors just lived with the smell. In fact, medieval people smelled so bad that perfume became a luxury item specifically invented to mask the stench of unwashed warrior bodies. Now let's talk about what happens when you actually get wounded, because this is where things go from bad to please just kill me now. Medieval medicine was essentially, let's try random stuff and hope you don't die. Got an arrow in your leg? The surgeon's going to pour boiling oil on it to cauterize the wound. Spoiler, that doesn't work, and now you're screaming in agony. Got a deep cut? They'd pack it with egg yolks, rose oil, and turpentine, which sounds like a salad dressing recipe, but was somehow considered medical treatment. And if you were really unlucky and got an infection, which happened constantly, your options were limited. Either die slowly and painfully, or let the surgeon amputate your limb with a saw while you bit down on a leather strap and prayed for unconsciousness. No anesthesia, by the way. They'd just hold you down and start cutting. The survival rate for amputations was about 50 to 50, which honestly seems generous. But wait, there's more. Let's talk about the 100 Years' War, because nothing says fun warrior experience like a conflict that lasted longer than most people's entire lifetimes. Imagine signing up to fight the French, spending years trudging through mud and disease-ridden camps, and then realizing your grandchildren are going to be fighting the same war. The Battle of Agincourt in 1415 is famous because the English longbowmen destroyed the French knights. But what's less famous is that the battlefield was a muddy swamp, and French knights in their fancy armor got stuck in the mud and literally drowned in 3 inches of water before anyone even killed them. They were so heavy they couldn't stand up, so English soldiers just walked around finishing them off like they were playing a medieval video game on easy mode. And speaking of dying, let's talk about the most common cause of death for medieval warriors. It wasn't glorious combat. It was disease. Dysentery, typhoid, the plague. These killed way more warriors than swords ever did. You could train your entire life, become an expert swordsman, survive multiple battles, and then die because you drank contaminated water from a river. Armies lost more men to bad hygiene than to enemy action. It got so bad that medieval commanders would sometimes retreat, not because they were losing fights, but because half their army was literally dying of diarrhea. Oh, and let's not forget about the psychological aspect. You know how modern soldiers get PTSD? Yeah, medieval warriors had that too, except nobody understood it or treated it. You'd watch your best friend get his head split open by an axe, somehow survive the battle yourself, and then be expected to just go about your day like nothing happened. No therapy, no support groups, just shake it off and get ready for the next battle. Many warriors turned to alcohol to cope, which created the delightful situation of having traumatized, heavily armed men who were constantly drunk. What could go wrong? But here's the kicker. Despite all this horror, being a warrior was actually considered one of the best career options available if you were noble-born. Because what was the alternative? Becoming a monk and spending your life copying manuscripts in silence? At least as a warrior, you got to travel, earn glory, and maybe win some loot if you survived. The medieval mindset was wild like that. They fully understood that being a warrior meant probable death in horrible ways, but they still thought it was preferable to basically every other option. So the next time you watch a medieval movie and think, man, I wish I could be a knight, just remember you'd be wearing 55 pounds of metal in summer heat, standing in your own waste, eating moldy bread, drinking dysentery water, and waiting for some peasant with a lucky arrow or a pointy stick to end your miserable existence. And if you somehow survived all that, you'd get to go home and die of the plague anyway. Yeah, medieval warfare was absolutely terrible, and anyone who says otherwise is either lying or selling you something. The end.